Hi, Ollie. Thanks for joining me on Behind the Build. I'm Paul Drake, and this podcast is all about getting real insights from leaders in housing, manufacturing, and construction. There's no scripts, there's no sugarcoating, and it's great exposure for you and your company. Here's how I'd like to structure our conversation today. I want to understand your background, the trends you're seeing in industry, whether it's technology, market shifts, or operational changes, the challenges you're facing right now, and where you'd like to take your business over the next 6 to 12 months. We'll wrap up with any insights that we might find valuable at the end. Does that sound good?
Wonderful. Sounds good. Glad to be here, Paul.
Excellent. It'll take about 30 to 40 minutes. So let's jump straight into you. If you wouldn't mind telling me a bit about yourself, Ollie, what's your role? How did you end up in this position?
Thanks, Paul. I'm Oli Reid. I'm Chief Executive at the Living Housing Group, which is made up of three social housing organisations. We've got Living Redefined, which is all about increasing the supply of properties within the social rented sector. We've got Living Concepts, which is a direct accommodation provider with local authorities, providing mainly step-down accommodation and temporary accommodation. And then we've got a new business, which is Living Support, which is all around supported exempt accommodation. So those are sort of three areas that I deal in. And sort of first fell into the sector accidentally. I don't have a background in homelessness or anything like that, or social housing. Never lived in social housing. Never sort of been involved in the sector as a user, as it were. Accidentally fell into it when landlords that we were working with made it very clear that they didn't want to work with DSS people, as they called it back then, and didn't want to deal with council tenants and all that kind of stuff. And a large employer was going into administration at the same time, and I thought that's really interesting. You know, these 8,000 people have just lost their jobs, but they haven't changed as an individual. But suddenly, to a landlord, they're an awful person. Wouldn't rent to them. Yesterday they would. Today they wouldn't because of their employment status that's completely out of their hands. So we set about working with local authorities and seeing how we can do stuff, and we're mainly based around the East Midlands and Lincolnshire area, but expanding quite a bit, and sort of that's how we fell into the sector, and sort of now providing 3, 4, 500 beds a night of accommodation across those sort of three businesses.
Very honourable. What does a typical day look like then? Is there a typical day? Suspect not.
I wish there was, and the irony is we've arranged. This is the third time we've tried to do this podcast, Paul, because there isn't really an ordinary day. But it's interesting because for me, the challenge is the tactical, the day to day kind of stuff, and the strategic stuff, and we were sort of touching on the difference between that. And we've got some. We're managing residents day to day, and we've got people with really complex needs. But I also, Living Redefined is almost run a bit like a SaaS platform, and requires me to be really strategic. And the day to day is a mix of sort of strategic and tactical stuff in terms of making sure we've got safe accommodation for residents who are progressing with their support plans and who are getting the help they need, and then equally running a marketing team in the afternoon or whatever, and having marketing meetings about how do we get more leads in social housing and stuff like that. So it's a real mix. You can imagine that working with people across those three businesses, there's probably 27 of us, and working with people is a joy and a challenge at the same time. And when you put residents in that mix, it's more joy and more challenges. There's I'd love to say that there's a really clear structure behind it, but I think it's whatever's in the inbox in the morning, and trying to progress some of those strategic aims as well. Certainly as that sort of strategic element has really been interesting. That's been my personal journey over this year, is getting out of the weeds, building a team, and starting to think more strategically, and really hiring those skills in. I'm very clear that supported accommodation is not my background, neither is most of the operations of it. So actually having key people and having a team that, one, understand the strategy and the vision, but then can deliver the day-to-day ops as well, has been really important to allow me as a founder to get out of the weeds and have a really good team around me who know what the vision is, and then can leave me to deal with the vision while they deal with the operation, knowing sort of the direction we're going. So, that's been this year's focus.
Good, yeah. It's quite a challenge, that one, isn't it? But very important if you're looking to scale, that's for sure.
Mm.
So moving on to trends then. So what are you seeing any trends in the industry right now, especially around sort of technology and operational efficiencies?
So I can only we don't speak to that many sort of other operators in the space. There's definitely a trend to move stuff online, move more digital, move more away from paper-based stuff, and this sector is, in my opinion, quite antiquated in its approach to technology. But understanding that actually, when we look at it from a resident perspective, the access to technology isn't there as it is with most other markets. We're dealing with some really vulnerable people. A number of residents probably don't have phones and stuff like that. So actually, that technology piece is a more of a challenge in this sector than I think than in a number of others. But for us, we're looking at how do we leverage technology to serve our stakeholders well. So our sort of challenges in this sector is lots of operators do one part of the process and very few do a pathway. And local authorities for us are screaming about pathways in terms of how can they move people through different support services to essentially end up at the same goal where they can sustain their own tenancy. And so we're looking at how do we leverage technology to help that, whether it's having additional support aids delivered by technology, whether it's having pathways plotted through technology. How do you allow residents to access their support notice at any one time by using technology and having tenant portals and stuff like that. So I think I think we're ahead of the curve in it when we look at how a lot of operators work on it. But I think that's the opportunity, is that how can you leverage AI, online processes, and all that kind of stuff to make resident outcomes even better. And I think that's the opportunity for us, is that in a really hypothetical world, a resident gets 2 hours of one-to-one support a week in terms of their well-being, for example. But what if they could have an AI agent that is there 24 hours a day, and they're going through a really rough patch at 11 o'clock at night, and actually they can talk to this bot and this thing that understands their support needs and can guide them, knowing a bit like an online practitioner kind of thing. And that for me is, how do you create a more on-demand support service that's not reliant on somebody being there all of the time, but there's a safety net outside of that. So yeah, I think there's a lot of emerging stuff. It's all a game of experimentation, but this is it's about adoption. It's about people, isn't it? So naturally, one has to tread carefully.
Yeah, absolutely. Are you seeing any impact from AI then, or is it too early to say?
Yeah, so our teams use it quite a lot, obviously, in terms of writing papers and communicating those messages and all that kind of stuff, as most people do with ChatGTP and whatnot. I think the adoption hasn't started for us yet, but we're really sort of understanding how we can adopt it, in terms of how can you lay it into those processes, how can you leverage AI agents to complete mundane processes and stuff like that. Because our challenge is all of our costs are fundamentally in housing management and whatnot are billed back to the local authority in housing benefit. So how can we leverage, we already have overseas teams that make sort of our processing of data more efficient and cheaper and stuff like that. But how can you then leverage it one step further to create even more affordable solutions for local authorities and stuff like that? But yeah, for us, it's massively on the roadmap, and it's how can we accelerate that?
Cool. Have you got any concerns or uncertainties with these shifts to more automation, with more use of AI? Would you say?
It comes down to who's using it, doesn't it? And I think this is the this is the thing, is that there's plenty of not great operators in supported accommodation. There's loads of great operators. It's using my view on all of the technology, AI, all of that stuff is how do you use it to be better, rather than just to cut costs and reduce people and reduce headcount and do it easier. So for me, it's how do we maintain that 2 hours of support a week, 1 hour of support a week, whatever it is, but then how do you increase that at a much cheaper cost by being able to leverage AI technology and stuff like that? How do you make yourself more efficient rather than rip all the cost out of it and make more money? Which I think is where a lot of people, their mind go to. But for us, we're really clear on how do we actually create a better service level by doing even more for a resident with the use of those kind of technologies. I think one of the challenges is how do you bring that technology to people when they've not got a phone? So there's some there's some low-level barriers in terms of how do you ensure people have got access to it in this kind of cohort where, technology is not as abundant as the private rented sector, for example, where everybody's got a phone, everyone's got a laptop, everyone's in work and it's all fine. Those affordability issues with having a phone or having a laptop and whatnot, how do you bridge that gap for us as a provider so people can benefit from that kind of stuff? Because the reality is there is a technology gap.
Have you got the answer for that? Yeah, that technology bridge.
No, we haven't. It's a flag on the roadmap in terms of how do you do that. But I don't think we've worked it out yet. So it's still on the thinking table as to, and it's a case. I don't think there's a universal answer to it because it's case by case basis. There's an overwhelming majority of our residents do have access to technology and smartphones and all that kind of stuff. But it's the question of how do you help those that don't, kind of thing, and make sure they get the same service and an opportunity, the same outcome without that kind of thing.
Yeah, I'm going off piece a bit here, but there's a charitable organisation not far from us, based in the northeast of England, and they repurpose smartphones technology that otherwise would go into land. Yeah, and try to make a little bit of money to cover the costs, but the whole point of this is for people that can't afford it. It was set up around COVID when kids didn't have access to tablets that needed them because they couldn't work in schools anymore, so they set that up, and it's quite a good thing, and it's a low cost point. And I was wondering whether there's other organisations throughout the country. So it serves two purposes really. The landfill, and it helps people that don't have access to technology or tech rather because they can't afford it.
Yeah, fascinating. I mean, it's the same. It's the same. It's just, slightly different use case, but you see it in, if a homeless person doesn't have a bank account, you're so locked out of society, right? If you haven't got a bank account, you can't really get a job. If you haven't got an address, you can't get a job. It's almost one of those fundamentals, right? If you haven't got a phone and you haven't got an address and you haven't got a bank account, you can't access the vast majority of society. So that's where we've seen, for example, HSBC with their homeless bank accounts and stuff like that they've done it. It's how do we, sort of charity organisations that can bridge that gap is great, but universally, how do we ensure that people aren't excluded from a society just because they don't have a bank account or just because they don't have a phone, kind of thing? I think it's a much bigger question. But there's clearly great work, done by third sector organisations who can help bridge that gap. But I suppose it's a societal question of how do you make sure you don't design a society that excludes people just because they haven't got an Apple or an Android device? It becomes a bit more of a design question, doesn't it?
Absolutely. I don't think we can solve that one. Not today, anyway. So, are you seeing any opportunities in this space that excite you? With technology?
And for us, it comes back to the this pathway piece. Is that what we don't see a lot of, and understandably because of competing priorities, I don't think local authorities want pathways, but I don't think they can be relied upon to necessarily deliver them. And I think there's a huge, in the homeless sort of sector that we're in, which is obviously a sort of subset of social housing. How can you create pathways of journeys that people go on rather than just providing one part of the problem? The fundamental problem, if somebody is homeless, they might go into temporary accommodation, but then they might have a support need which inhibits them from being able to maintain a tenancy on their own. So then they need supported accommodation, so they go to somewhere else to have that, and then they go to somewhere else and they get some step down accommodation, and then they go somewhere else and they might get a private landlord. But if they've gone through that journey too quick, they might come back around and all that kind of stuff. But actually, what we see is all of those parts of the puzzle are generally provided by different people. Some are provided by the private sector, some are provided by the third sector, some are provided by local authorities, and it's different in every local authority. What we're trying to do is connect those dots under one roof and go, well, okay, we've got temporary accommodation. Can we provide the supported accommodation? And can we provide the end lifetime tenancy for that person at the end of it, all under one roof? Make it all affordable by cross-subsidising activities, and actually provide a solution where somebody can come and go all the way through that process, rather than having to rely on somebody else to go, rather than getting to the end of a support journey and having to rely on a private sector landlord to come and go, I'll give this person a chance who's on universal credit that's got criminal convictions, which we know access is a problem. Can we do all of it internally? And I think that's where there's opportunity, is to link those pieces up. And I think there's the ability to, we've just sort of we're having our own CRM developed, for example, that will enable logistically in the background to be able to plot those journeys and deliver those journeys, as well as, it being in the physical asset. So that's where we're seeing the opportunity, is that for far too long, local authorities have been firefighting with crisis of going, I've got loads of people that need this, I've got loads of people that need that, I've got a cohort that needs this, and actually you just created a really fragmented process on the basis of firefighting different cohorts. Oh, we've got loads of asylum seekers that need this, we've got loads of that need this, we've got loads of this, but actually how can you string it all together and go, how can you create flow? Because we speak to local authorities and they've just got giant pens of people, pens of people in temporary accommodation, pens of people in supported accommodation, and then they've got no access to step down accommodation or the private rented sector. So how can we provide all three of those sort of parts, and then connect it all together under one roof? So I think where you can have sort of multi-agency or multi-organisation pathways or under one roof, as we're trying to do it, I think that's the real opportunity in this sector that increases the velocity in which you can put somebody through that pathway and achieve the outcome that everyone wants, kind of thing.
Great. I'm going to move on to your current state and strengths in terms of your business. So where would you see your business is currently positioned in the marketplace?
So we're very much, as I say, East Midlands and Lincolnshire based, and really providing homeless services. So that's working with local authorities to identify rough sleepers and place them in some form of temporary accommodation, whether that's some night shelters that we support that are free and voluntary, all the way into our sort of nightly paid temporary accommodation. And then plotting that pathway through in terms of providing that supported accommodation. We're on the lower end of supported accommodation, and then providing that step down accommodation that people can access. So where we don't provide sort of really complex needs and care packages and stuff like that, in terms of people who've got really complex needs and need multiple hours of support a week, we're more of a generalist pathway. People that have got general drug and alcohol problems, general budgeting, they need low level support in maintaining a tenancy. That's the kind of cohort that we'll support. Where we sort of don't operate at the minute is sort of under 18, 16 to 18s. We don't operate there, and we don't operate in sort of the really complex cases of where people need multiple people, 3-on-1 care, or even sort of multiple hours of care a week. That's the side of that we haven't stepped into yet, but is absolutely on the roadmap.
Okay. Is there anything that you do extraordinarily well? What's your strongest point? What you do?
Extraordinarily well.
It's a good word, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I think what we do well is fundamentally we are a private sector organisation. We're not a charity. We're not a CIC. And I think what we do well is balance our responsibilities. We're very resident focused. We're very in all of the businesses that we have, we don't talk about finance. There's obviously a finance function. There's obviously a responsibility there. But we're a commercial organisation. But we've inadvertently created a culture where people talk about residents and bed spaces and outcomes miles ahead, miles before we speak about finances and what that means and what the bottom line looks like and all that kind of stuff. So that's what we've done almost by accident, if by not talking about it. Even in our sort of Live and Redefine, which is that whole SaaS platform, which is around, connecting private sector landlords with other supported living organisations. We've got teams that earn commission in that because it's a, direct sales role for some people and stuff like that. But again, they talk about the bed spaces that they've, or the bed space or the units or whatever that they've handed over each month. So I think what we do well is, and I think where the sector doesn't do so well is that it assumes that every private sector organisation is out to feather its shareholders and feather its own nest. And actually, what we need to do is we need to blend the compassion that we find in charities and third sectors with the efficiencies that we find in private sector organisations, and create a hybrid kind of thing in the middle. And I think that's what we do quite well. Is that we cross-subsidise services, for example. We do some stuff because it's the right thing to do, and it doesn't make us any money, but it's the right thing to do. Whether it's supporting night shelters or or funding support through surpluses elsewhere and stuff like that. So I think, just by the collection of people that we are in the small team that we are, we've fostered a really resident-centric approach that has, as I say, the compassion of a charity, but the efficiency of a private sector organisation. And I think fundamentally that benefits the resident, is that they're dealing with a very competent organisation, but that really cares for them, and it isn't ripping a local authority off. I think that sort of triangle approach that we've got has served us well, and will hopefully continue to serve as well.
What do your customers, and when I say customers, the people that benefit from what you're doing in the housing space, what do they say about you? Do they say anything about you? Do they say positive things?
Yeah, we get a lot of feedback. I mean, some of our housing managers that go out and visit our temporary accommodation units each week and meet the residents and all that, and we have some really short stays, and we have some quite protracted stays as well, where there's some complex cases. And we've had people that have been homeless and sort of left gifts and whatnot for our property managers and housing support officers and stuff like that, which is I think just shows the kind of work that they do. And they go that extra mile of go out somewhere, someone's having a problem at 8 o'clock at night, and and they go out to it and they just check they're okay. Or we've got a remote team that can do welfare checks at sort of any time of the day. Residents generally have a very positive experience with us. We've still got our first resident that we moved in from a local authority 8 years ago now. It's great. People, we have a really long tenure with us, and when people are in step down accommodation, there's no reason, as long as they pay their rent, pay their service charges, and behave, there's no reason for them to move out, kind of thing. And that's the approach that we've always had, which is why the local authorities like it, because that's the ultimate, is stop that repeat homelessness cycle. I think residents often tell get on with their housing support officers and their property managers, and often there's gifts left at the end of a stay in temporary accommodation and stuff like that. So I think that's quite remarkable, given that these people typically come from nothing and have been homeless, and they find something to give at the end of a tenancy. It sort of reminds you. The most emotive ones for us is we deal with a lot of sort of domestic abuse families, and you can see what they've come from, and we've had, as you can imagine, horrible stories of what people have fled from and stuff like that, and we move them into a 3-bed house in Lincoln or whatever, something like that, and they're just in tears. So I think the team are very. The team are always getting very positive feedback from residents with not just the service, but also the products that we give. Local authorities say you don't need to put a TV in temporary accommodation, you don't need to do this, you don't need to do that, but it's that whole thing of if we wouldn't live in it ourselves, we probably wouldn't provide it. So it's that kind of approach as well.
That's good. Moving on to sort of the future goals and challenges then for you and your business. So where do you want to take it, business, over the next sort of 9 to 12 months, or 6 to 12 months rather? Yeah,
so we're currently at about 400-ish units at the minute. Over the next 12 months, we want to scale that to just over 1,000, and there's a roadmap to do that. And fundamentally, we're a very sort of inch wide, mile deep kind of thing. We'll find something we're good at, and we'll do it over and over again. And this isn't a game for us of trying to do everything in every sector. We know what we're good at, and we think there's value to be had by doing that. So we want to we want to really nail it, which is what we've been doing with a number of local authorities for a number of years, and then replicate that where local authorities see there's a benefit, from that pathway. We want to then go and replicate that. So for us, it's quite a cookie cutter approach in terms of, this is the service that we've created here. Would it benefit you if we set it up there? Okay, in what numbers? We procure the stock, we deliver the pathway, we create the outcomes, and then on to the next one, kind of thing. So that's going to be our approach over the next 3 to 5 years, realistically, in terms of where we've gotten in with the local authority, delivering one service, delivering two services, delivering the pathway, and then maintaining that. That's going to be the opportunity for us moving forward.
So you touched on sort of pathways quite a lot through our conversation. And what do you see the biggest operational challenge to achieving what you're doing? Is it those pathways, or is it something else?
Yeah, and this is why I think for us the enabler, but equally then the challenge is technology. Because this is why we've gone the route of, for example, designing a custom CRM that will map out and manage all of our resident journeys and resident outcomes and everything. Because I don't think many people have done this sort of pathway kind of approach before. As I say, usually it's you're passed between one provider to the next provider to the next landlord to the next landlord kind of thing. And actually none of the data flows. So, managing everything from support notes to support meetings to health and safety checks to rent reconciliation to everything in one CRM for us is the backbone of a lot of this, is being able to provide really continual service in temporary accommodation, then into supported accommodation, and then into step down, and maintaining that service all the way through. For us, technology is the sort of backbone of all of that, because otherwise it'd be a hell of a lot of paper and an absolute nightmare, because you wouldn't be able to, organise all of that realistically with any level of efficiency. So, it's the opportunity to do it, but equally it's a challenge if you don't get it right. Is that tech piece is, how can you maintain that service level all the way throughout? Not just for the resident, but for local authorities, for landlords that we lease properties from, to housing benefit teams who need to check and audit support notes, to the regulator who needs to check the compliance, all that kind of stuff. How do you satisfy all of those parties all the way through that journey kind of thing? So I think that's definitely the challenge, but equally that's the opportunity, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So what's been your biggest struggle so far then to get to this point?
What's been the biggest struggle? I can't say there's been one that's sort of our journey's been to date has been very organic. We've been doing this for 7 years now in terms of plotting this kind of pathway, and doing everything from we started with step down accommodation, then a local authority asked us to do temporary accommodation and stuff like that. So you get the day-to-day challenges of running a business and and supporting people and all that kind of stuff. But structurally, that we haven't really had many big challenges, because it's been quite organic. This hasn't been sort of by design. This has been holding good relationships with local authorities, and same with landlords, and supporting residents and all that kind of stuff. So I can see as we're now really intent on going at this and going at some pace and scaling, and now we've sort of worked out the blueprint, there's definitely going to be challenges and problems ahead, I have no doubt. But big operational challenges, we're a small provider by many measures now, and we've got that over the last sort of 6-7 years. So the growth hasn't been crazy, but the realizations and the learnings have been quite have been really measured. In terms of that, we've gone, right, okay, we didn't know that. We capture that back in the process. We change it, and we're not on board in our next property until another month or 2 months down the line. So that sort of slower growth has been quite useful in it's quite unique for an organisation of our size, for example, to have have gone down the custom CRM route, and everything that we do is quite custom and made to us kind of stuff. So, but that's where we've sort of learned a lot of that. So I can't say we've had massive challenges, but I'm not naive enough to think that there's not plenty down the track on the way, lying in the road for us.
So you mentioned your goals, aspirations. So from a personal point of view, then, what does it mean to you to achieve these objectives? Because you're quite a passionate guy. So what does it mean?
So yeah, fundamentally, this is my belief that nobody should sleep rough. On any night, anywhere in the UK, there shouldn't be a reason that anyone rough sleeps, and I think that's the core theme that cuts across all of the organisations. Everyone's got a view is that homelessness shouldn't exist. That's the mission that we're on. Across the group, for everything from living redefined, living concepts, and living support. And that's why we get up and do it every day, because it's 2025. There shouldn't be anyone, and it's that simple. Is that there just shouldn't be anyone on the street. It's crazy to think that you can fly around the world, you can go anywhere, you can go to space, you can do this, you can do that. And I'm not a communist by any measure. You should be able to go and do all of that, but equally, society has to move sort of together, kind of thing. The fact that we're in 2025 and 4,500 people, the 2025 homelessness count is coming up and all that kind of stuff. Homelessness is rising. And it's just crazy. So that's really the stick we measure ourselves by, and the goal fundamentally is that simple. Is that nobody should have to sleep rough. And I people tell me I'm crazy. That is the goal. If I die trying, that's good enough. But if we keep trying and we achieve it, then even better.
Yeah, I don't think you're crazy. I think you're doing a really, really good job. And there should be more of you, Olis, in the world. It would be a better place, that's for sure.
Many people would say that's a terrifying prospect. And absolutely
I don't know you well enough. Right, Oli, we've come to the end of our podcast. It's been absolutely fantastic. I've really enjoyed it, and it's been a pleasure. You've been so candid and open with your real challenges and opportunities. So thank you very much for taking the time to speak to us.
Thank you, Paul. Appreciate it.